In 1956, Chrysler quietly handed over one of the most advanced automobiles ever designed to a team of Italian craftsmen in Turin. If stories about lost machines and forgotten engineering belong in your feed, subscribe to Forgotten Detroit. The car was called the Norseman, a fully drivable, one-of-a-kind concept with a cantilevered roof that required no front pillars whatsoever, something no American automaker had ever pulled off at this scale. Every panel was shaped by hand. It took years to build. And when it was finally finished, Chrysler crated it and loaded it onto a ship bound for New York, where it was supposed to stun the world. It never arrived. By the mid-1950s, Chrysler had a problem. General Motors and Ford were winning the showroom war on the strength of their styling alone. Harley Earl at GM had already made concept cars a cultural event. Chrysler, despite building genuinely strong vehicles, looked conservative by comparison, and the company knew it. The man tasked with changing that was Virgil Exner. He had come up through Studebaker before landing at Chrysler in 1949, and he brought with him an obsession with proportion, speed, and what he called the forward look, a design language built around low rooflines, pronounced tail fins, and a sense that the car was moving even when parked. Exner believed American cars had gotten bloated and cautious, and he wanted to prove Chrysler could lead rather than follow. But proving it on an assembly line was slow. Factory tooling, union schedules, and production timelines meant bold ideas got softened before they ever reached the street. Exner needed a different arena, somewhere a single vision could be built without compromise. That led him to Italy, specifically to Turin, and to Carrozzeria Ghia, a coach-building house with the skilled hand fabrication that no Detroit plant could replicate at the time. Ghia had already done work for other American clients, but what Exner had in mind went further than anything they had attempted together. Ghia was chosen over Pininfarina because the working relationship was already established, and the man who would translate Exner's sketches into physical steel was a craftsman named Billy Brownlee. The project they were about to begin would consume years of work, and it had a name, the Norseman. To build the Norseman, Ghia essentially cleared a section of their Turin workshop and dedicated it, almost entirely, to one car. What followed was 15 months of continuous hand labor, and the number attached to it is worth sitting with, approximately 50,000 man-hours. That is not a rounding error. 50,000 hours means a team of skilled craftsmen working full days, 6 days a week, for over a year, with virtually no stage of the process handed off to a machine. The body panels were aluminum, hand-formed and hammer-welded by metalworkers who had spent their careers doing exactly this kind of bespoke fabrication. The finish was a two-tone metallic green, with red detailing around the wheel openings, colors chosen to make the car read as a complete visual argument rather than just a shape. Every curve had to be consistent across both sides, matched by eye and by feel, not by a stamping die. The final cost came to $150,000. In today's money, that sits somewhere between $1.6 and $2.1 million, depending on the inflation measure you use. For a single automobile, a single fully drivable automobile, not a static display piece propped up on a turntable, but a functioning car that could pull out of Ghia's gates under its own power. That last detail matters. Exner and Ghia were not building theater. They were building proof that the forward look could exist in 3 dimensions, that the proportions worked at road level, that the Norseman was a real vehicle with a real future ahead of it. By the summer of 1956, that future was scheduled to begin in New York. Now, here is where the Norseman stops being an impressive exercise in craftsmanship and becomes something genuinely radical. Look at a conventional car from 1956. The roof is held up by 3 sets of pillars, the A pillars framing the windshield, the B pillars behind the front doors, the C pillars at the rear. They are structural load bearers, and removing any one of them would compromise the integrity of the entire body. Exner's design for the Norseman removed the A pillars entirely, both of them, gone. The roof was cantilevered forward from the C pillars only, resting at the front on nothing but a curved, frameless windshield. There was no vertical steel column between the driver and the open road. The greenhouse, the entire glass area wrapping around the occupants, became fully panoramic. The door glass had no vent windows, no interruptions. You were, in effect, sitting inside a fishbowl with unobstructed sightlines in nearly every direction. Making that work without the front pillars meant engineering the roof as a structural element in itself, transferring load backward rather than downward at the front. Every component in that roofline had to carry stress it normally would not have to. And then Exner added a 12-square-foot power-sliding sunroof, manufactured by PPG Industries, into the middle of that already stressed assembly. By every account from the people involved, that sunroof was the single hardest component on the entire car to engineer. The details extending from that central decision were equally ahead of their time. Headlamps concealed behind pop-up panels, door handles integrated flush into the bodywork, a fully enclosed aerodynamic underbelly, door-mounted retractable seatbelts, a feature most American drivers would not encounter for another 2 decades. None of these were styling flourishes layered on top of the car. They each followed directly from the same logic: remove every interruption between the occupant and the experience of driving. The pillarless roof was not the showpiece of that philosophy. It was the proof of it. By 1957, General Motors had spent the better part of a decade making concept cars into cultural events. The Motorama shows drew hundreds of thousands of visitors. Futuristic dream machines rotated on podiums under spotlights, while crowds pressed against the velvet ropes. GM had turned the auto show into theater, and every other American automaker knew it. Chrysler's answer was the Norseman. This was not a side attraction or a styling exercise to fill floor space. Company leadership positioned it as the centerpiece of their entire 1957 auto show campaign. The car that would demonstrate, definitively, that Chrysler's design division could match anything coming out of Detroit's other great houses. Virgil Exner had spent years building toward that argument. The Norseman was supposed to close it. The commercial stakes were direct. Chrysler had been losing ground in the perception war even when its sales numbers held. GM's concept program had locked up the idea of innovation in the public imagination. Showing up at auto shows with well-engineered but visually conservative production cars was no longer enough. The Norseman was meant to change the conversation.
To America's greatest auto exhibit.
When production at the Ghia coachworks in Turin ran over schedule, the Norseman missed its planned cargo ship. It was crated and loaded onto the next available sailing instead. The delay seemed minor at the time, a logistical inconvenience, not a crisis. No one in Turin or Detroit had any particular reason to worry about the name of the ship that would carry it across the Atlantic. That ship was the Andrea Doria. The Andrea Doria was not simply a ship. When it launched in 1951, it was Italy's statement to the world, proof that a country still rebuilding from the ruins of the Second World War could produce something genuinely magnificent. Named after a 16th-century Genoese admiral, the liner was the fastest, largest, and most expensive vessel Italy had ever put to sea. She carried original paintings. Her 3 swimming pools were among the first on any transatlantic liner. First-class passengers moved through interiors that rivaled the finest hotels in Milan or Rome. For Italians on both sides of the Atlantic, the Doria was not a mode of transportation. She was a source of national pride at a moment when that pride was still being rebuilt. On July 17, 1956, the Andrea Doria departed Genoa on her 51st westbound crossing, bound for New York. Passengers boarded in the thousands. Cargo was loaded into the holds, including crate after crate of ordinary freight, and one very particular wooden crate in hold number 2, containing Chrysler's most important concept car. The Doria was 11 days out of a difficult refit. Her crew was experienced. The weather, as she moved through the North Atlantic shipping lanes near Nantucket, had turned foggy, but fog was routine at that time of year, and the ship carried the latest radar equipment. There was no reason, on that evening of July 25th, to expect anything other than a routine arrival in New York the following morning. At 11 minutes past 11 on the night of July 25th, 1956, the Andrea Doria was 51 miles south of Nantucket, moving through dense fog at roughly 21 knots. Her radar had been tracking an approaching vessel for over an hour. On the bridge of that vessel, the MS Stockholm, a Swedish-American liner headed east, radar operators had also been watching the Doria's return for some time. What happened next is still debated. Each crew interpreted the other's course differently. Each believed a safe passing was underway. Neither slowed enough to matter. The Stockholm's reinforced icebreaker bow, built to punch through ice, not to give way to steel, drove into the Andrea Doria's starboard side at full collision force. The gash it opened measured 50 feet long and 30 feet deep. It punched directly into fuel tanks and cargo holds. Hold number 2 flooded immediately. The Doria listed 7 degrees to starboard within minutes. She never came back. By the time the list reached 15 degrees, her portside lifeboats could not swing clear of the hull. That was her survivability threshold, the point beyond which half her rescue capacity became useless. She passed it fast and kept going. What followed was 11 hours of rescue operations involving at least 5 ships, including the Stockholm itself, which, despite the damage to its own bow, managed to pull survivors from the water. In total, 1,663 people were saved. 46 passengers and crew aboard the Doria died. 5 more died aboard the Stockholm. The Norseman, Chrysler's hand-built concept car, sealed in its wooden crate in hold number 2, went down with the ship when the Andrea Doria rolled and sank at 10:17 on the morning of July 26th. It had never been seen by the American public. It has never been recovered. Chrysler knew the Norseman was gone within days of the sinking. The car was fully insured, so the financial loss was covered. The question was, what came next? And the answer was nothing. Chrysler officially declined to build a replica. The company's stated reasoning was straightforward. The time required to reconstruct the car from scratch would push completion so far into the future that the design would look dated by the time it was finished. Concept cars lived and died on their moment. The Norseman's moment had passed before anyone in America saw it. That decision made the loss permanent in a way the sinking alone did not. The ship could theoretically be salvaged. A replica could theoretically have been built. Chrysler chose neither, and that choice closed the door. What it also closed was any serious effort to reconstruct the engineering record. The Norseman was built by Ghia in Turin, from stylistic renderings and direct collaboration, not from a complete set of technical blueprints held in a Chrysler archive somewhere. The drawings that did exist at Ghia were working documents for craftsmen, not the kind of formal engineering package that survives ownership changes and corporate reorganizations. Chrysler went through several of those in the following decades. The probability that detailed construction records survived is considered low. What does survive is a limited collection of pre-sinking press photographs and published descriptions from automotive journalists who saw the car in Turin before it was crated. Those images are the primary visual record. They show the exterior clearly. Interior details are less complete. One amateur attempted a fiberglass recreation around 2004. A builder named Marty Martino documented the project, but no confirmed completed replica has ever surfaced publicly. The Norseman exists today as photographs, measurements taken from those photographs, and accounts from people who stood next to it. That is the entire physical record of a car. Chrysler considered the most advanced it had ever built. The Andrea Doria lies roughly 240 feet below the surface, off Nantucket, resting on its starboard side. That depth is reachable. Technical divers with the right training and equipment have made it down there, but the conditions are punishing. Cold water, near-zero visibility, strong currents, and a hull that has been collapsing on itself for nearly 70 years. Divers have died attempting it. The wreck is considered one of the most dangerous recreational dives on the eastern seaboard. Expeditions have reached the site repeatedly over the decades. They have brought back china, portholes, silverware, artifacts from the passenger areas. What none of them has ever brought back is a photograph of the Norseman, or any piece of it. The cargo hold, where the car was stored, sits in one of the most structurally compromised sections of the ship. Getting to it is not simply a matter of swimming down and looking. Even setting aside access, the car itself presents a hard physical reality. The Norseman was built primarily from aluminum. Aluminum does not rust the way steel does, but 68 years submerged in salt water inside a deteriorating sediment-filled hold does not leave much worth recovering. What divers would likely find, if they found anything, is corroded structural remnants, enough to confirm a vehicle was there, not enough to tell you what the vehicle was. No funded organized salvage effort specifically targeting the Norseman has ever been documented. There is no expedition in planning, no organization raising money for it, no coordinated attempt on record. So the honest answer to whether the Norseman still exists is, something is probably down there. Whether it is recognizable as the most advanced car Chrysler ever built is a different question entirely, and the evidence suggests the answer is no. Here is what makes the Norseman genuinely unusual among lost machines. It kept influencing things after it disappeared. Chrysler's designers did not shelf the ideas that went down with the ship. The 1958 Chrysler d'Elegance carried the Norseman's front-end design language forward almost directly. The cantilevered roof concept, the one Chrysler considered too structurally radical to put into production in 1956, resurfaced in the thinking that eventually shaped the 1966 and 1967 Dodge Charger. You can draw a line, not a straight one, but a real one, from a car rotting on the ocean floor to one of the most recognizable American muscle cars ever built. The panoramic roofline idea proved even more durable. Eliminating the B-pillar and floating the roof over the passenger cabin became a benchmark that designers kept returning to across subsequent decades. Modern cars with panoramic glass roofs and pillarless silhouettes are chasing the same spatial logic Ghia's engineers were working out in Turin in 1955. None of that legacy required the car to survive. If anything, the fact that the Norseman exists only in photographs has kept it from being reduced to a museum artifact with a placard. It stays open. Every designer who has ever seen those images gets to decide what it means, what it would have driven like, where it would have led. Andrea Doria took a lot of things down with it that July night. The Norseman was one of them. But an idea that never reaches production never has to answer to reality. And that is a strange kind of permanence. If you made it this far, drop a comment telling us which car you think owes the most to designs that never made it to the road. And thank you for watching. What the Norseman would have changed, that is the question worth sitting with. Leave your answer in the comments. If you want more stories about the cars, factories, and ideas Detroit lost before the world ever saw them, subscribe and hit the bell. The next Forgotten Detroit episode is already on its way, and it is another one that deserved a better ending.